A really supported, sweet life, running around and doing the things that I think everyone maybe is part of your day-to-day, but if you don't think about what life would be like without those moments.
Right.
Under blazing studio lights, a routine live interview suddenly took a chilling turn. Meghan Markle smiled, paused, then visibly faltered as one unexpected question sliced through rehearsed answers. Producers froze. Viewers leaned closer. What was asked that shifted the room's energy so sharply? Sources say the moment unraveled carefully guarded narratives, exposing nerves rarely seen on air. As seconds stretched and silence screamed louder than words, the broadcast teetered on disaster. Millions watched live, stunned and breathless. Was this an innocent misstep, or the question that revealed everything? When the air changed on live television, the interview was already in motion when something quietly went wrong. The cameras were rolling, the lights were warm, and Meghan Markle sat exactly as she had planned. Upright, composed, her shoulders squared with intention. From the outside, everything looked controlled. Her voice was steady. Her answers were polished but not robotic, thoughtful without being revealing. This was meant to be a moment of balance, a carefully managed appearance designed to project calm authority and reclaim narrative control. And for a while, it worked. She smiled at the right moments. She nodded when expected. Each response felt measured, as though it had been rehearsed not just once, but many times, refined down to its safest form. Yet beneath that smooth surface, something else was happening. A pause lingered a second too long before one answer. Her eyes blinked rapidly, then stilled. Her jaw tightened, just briefly, before relaxing again. Her hands, folded neatly in her lap, pressed together with a little too much force, knuckles paling under the studio lights. Most viewers didn't catch it right away. Live television has a way of disguising tension as professionalism. But the silence between questions began to stretch, and the atmosphere subtly shifted. The host, sensing it, adjusted their tone, not with confrontation or accusation, but with a calm that felt unusually precise. It wasn't hostile, it was focused. The kind of calm that makes you lean in because you sense it's intentional. Meghan's posture remained elegant, but her stillness grew heavier. She tilted her head slightly as she listened, her expression neutral yet alert, as if bracing for something she couldn't quite see coming. The rhythm of the interview slowed. Gone was the easy back and forth of a promotional conversation. In its place came something more deliberate, more probing, though still wrapped in courtesy. The audience at home began to feel it too. This no longer felt like a platform for rehearsed messages or controlled storytelling. It felt like an examination. Not aggressive, not cruel, but unmistakably a test. The kind where every word matters and every silence speaks louder than sound. Meghan answered again, but this time her voice carried a faint edge, barely noticeable, yet impossible to ignore once heard. She inhaled before finishing her sentence, as though steadying herself. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the host, then away, then back again. It was the look of someone maintaining composure while recalculating in real time. The host leaned back slightly, allowing space, letting the moment breathe. That choice, intentional or instinctive, only heightened the tension. With no interruption, no redirect, the weight of the exchange settled squarely on Meghan's shoulders. The studio felt quieter, even though nothing had technically changed. The lights didn't dim, the cameras didn't stop, but the mood had shifted unmistakably. This was no longer about presenting a polished image. It was about endurance, about whether control could be maintained under pressure that wasn't loud or dramatic, but quietly relentless. Meghan's face remained composed, yet the micro-expressions told a deeper story, an internal effort to hold ground as the space around her narrowed. And then, without anyone fully realizing how it happened, the silence arrived again, longer this time, heavier, the kind that makes people uncomfortable because it suggests something unresolved is about to surface. No one moved to fill it, not the host, not Meghan, not the audience watching from their screens. It was in that silence, before any decisive moment, before any single question landed, that control truly began to slip. So, What was really unfolding in that tense, unsettling silence? And could it reveal truths no one expected? Stay tuned. A question too calm to deflect. It arrived without warning, wrapped in a voice so even it almost sounded gentle. That was what made it unsettling. The host didn't lean forward or raise their tone. There was no dramatic pause designed for effect. Instead, the question slipped into the room as if it belonged there all along, simple in structure, devastating in implication. It asked not about achievements or projects, but about the life behind the image, the version of Meghan Markle the public never stops arguing over. The host spoke carefully, choosing words that couldn't be accused of hostility. They referenced the growing public perception that her private life had become chaotic, even troubling, and asked how she reconciled that image with the control she so often projected. Then came the follow-up, delivered just as calmly. How had she managed her marriage under that pressure? And how did she respond to claims that she had shaped, guided, or even manipulated her husband's choices to protect her own narrative? Nothing in the phrasing was explosive. There were no accusations stated as facts. Yet the room felt like it had lost oxygen. The question didn't attack. It exposed a gap, one that couldn't be filled with polished language or rehearsed deflection. It asked Meghan to address contradictions she had spent years navigating without ever naming directly. She didn't answer right away. For the first time since the interview began, silence stretched beyond comfort. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. She inhaled, slow and deliberate, but the breath caught halfway through, as if her body had reacted before her mind could catch up. The studio, moments earlier alive with movement and light, seemed to freeze in place. Her eyes shifted, not wildly but with purpose, scanning the space in front of her as though searching for an anchor that wasn't there. She blinked once, then again. The muscles along her jaw tightened, releasing only after visible effort. Her hands, still folded, pressed together harder, the tension traveling up her arms and settling in her shoulders. The host waited. That choice mattered. There was no interruption, no softening of the moment. By allowing the silence to remain untouched, the weight of the question grew heavier with each passing second. The audience, both in the studio and watching from home, felt it. This was no longer about gossip or headlines. It was about identity, agency, and accountability under relentless public scrutiny. Meghan's breathing changed. What had been steady and controlled now came in shorter, shallower rhythms. Her posture remained upright, but it felt fragile, like a carefully balanced structure under sudden strain. She looked toward the host, then briefly downward, as if measuring the distance between honesty and self-preservation. Cameras continued to roll, their presence suddenly intrusive. Every micro-expression felt magnified. The studio crew stayed perfectly still, unsure whether this moment would resolve itself or unravel further. Even the light seemed harsher now, revealing rather than flattering. When Meghan finally lifted her gaze again, there was no immediate answer. Only a look that suggested calculation had given way to something more human. The question had done what it was never openly designed to do. It had stripped away momentum, forcing her into a space where silence spoke louder than any response she could offer. And in that suspended moment, as the room waited and the world watched, it became clear that whatever came next would not restore the interview's original balance. The line between control and collapse had already begun to blur. But how did a single question strip control, revealing a moment of raw humanity? And what does it mean for Meghan? Keep watching. The weight beneath the silence. To understand why that silence lingered so heavily in the studio, it helps to step back from the moment itself and look at everything that led up to it. This was never just one interview or one difficult question. It was the culmination of years spent under a microscope, where every word Meghan Markle spoke was dissected, replayed, and judged from every possible angle. Long before she sat in that chair, the pressure had already been building, layer by layer, quietly and relentlessly. From the moment she entered the global spotlight, Meghan became more than a person. She became a symbol. To some, she represented independence and disruption. To others, controversy and control. Her voice was praised as powerful by supporters and criticized as calculated by skeptics. Every attempt to speak openly was met with applause from one side and suspicion from another. Over time, even silence became suspicious. Say too much and she was accused of seeking attention. Say too little and she was accused of hiding something. There was no neutral ground left. What the audience rarely saw was the effort it took to navigate that impossible space. Emotional restraint was not a performance choice. It was survival. Each public appearance demanded careful balance. Show strength without seeming cold. Show vulnerability without appearing manipulative. Every sentence carried consequences far beyond its words. That kind of constant vigilance does not fade when the cameras turn on. It follows you into every conversation, every interview, every pause. The question asked moments earlier didn't create this tension. It exposed it. It forced Meghan to confront, in real time, the gap between how she understood herself and how she was perceived. The suggestion that her private life was chaotic, or that she exerted hidden influence over her husband, echoed narratives that had been circulating for years. Narratives she had responded to indirectly, selectively, or not at all, often because responding only fueled them further. Living in that contradiction takes a toll. Being both an individual with personal emotions and a public figure carrying symbolic weight means rarely being allowed to simply exist. Every expression becomes evidence. Every decision becomes a statement. Over time, the body learns to hold tension quietly, to lock it behind practiced calm. But that tension doesn't disappear. It accumulates. Seen through that lens, what unfolded on live television begins to look less like a breakdown and more like a moment of exposure. The stillness, the controlled breathing that suddenly faltered, the searching gaze, all of it reflected years of unspoken pressure pressing forward at once. This wasn't a weakness surfacing. It was endurance reaching its limit. The investigative truth of the moment lies there, not in rumors or accusations, but in the visible cost of constant scrutiny. Meghan's silence carried the weight of every time she had chosen restraint over reaction, composure over confrontation. It revealed how much energy it takes to maintain control when your identity is constantly debated by people who feel entitled to define it for you. By the time the camera lingered on her face again, the audience was no longer just watching an interview. They were witnessing the result of prolonged strain finally becoming visible. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded with history, expectation, and unresolved tension, setting the stage for what the moment would soon demand from her next. And now, can a single silent moment reveal the true cost of constant scrutiny, or has the world already misread it? Stay glued. When silence took over the room. The camera never cut away. That alone made the moment unbearable. What returned to the screen was not a dramatic outburst or a sudden confession, but stillness, thick, unbroken, and impossible to ignore. The live moment resumed exactly where it had stalled, and yet everything felt different. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether it was appropriate to breathe, clap, or shift in their seats. No one wanted to be the first to disturb what now felt like a fragile space. The host remained still as well. No follow-up, no rescue question, no attempt to soften what had already been said. It was a deliberate choice, and everyone could feel it. Interrupting now would have broken something important. The silence, uncomfortable as it was, had become the point. Somewhere off camera, producers exchanged looks, hands hovering near controls, uncertain whether continuing was respectful or risky. Cutting away might protect the broadcast, but staying might reveal something rare and unscripted. Meghan leaned forward slightly, as if preparing to answer at last. Her lips parted, a word almost formed. Then she stopped, her eyes closed for a brief moment, not in defeat, but in restraint. It was the kind of pause that suggested an internal debate unfolding at high speed. What could be said? What should be said, and what might never be taken back once spoken aloud. Her composure hadn't shattered, but it had changed. The practiced ease from earlier was gone. In its place was something raw and unguarded. She drew a breath, slower this time, as if grounding herself. When her eyes opened again, They glistened, not with tears, but with effort. Effort to stay present. Effort to remain dignified while standing emotionally exposed. The studio lights seemed harsher now, revealing every small movement. Her hands loosened slightly, no longer clenched, but no longer steady either. Shoulders that had been held firmly now dropped just enough to signal fatigue. This was the collapse. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply human. The armor she had worn for years had slipped, and beneath it was not chaos but vulnerability. The audience sensed it instantly. This wasn't a moment for reaction. It was a moment for witnessing. The usual distance between public figure and observer dissolved. Meghan was no longer presenting a version of herself. She was negotiating with her own boundaries in real time. Honesty stood on one side, self-protection on the other. And between them was the weight of knowing that millions were watching. The host finally leaned forward, but still said nothing. That silence became an acknowledgement of the difficulty of the moment, of the complexity of the question, and of the courage it took simply to sit there and endure it. There was respect in that restraint even as tension continued to coil through the room. This was the emotional collapse fully realized, not as a loss of control, but as the moment control loosened its grip. Meghan had not fallen apart. She had stopped performing, and in doing so, she allowed the world to see the cost of carrying expectations for too long without relief. The interview had crossed a line it could not retreat from, and whatever followed would be shaped by this quiet, suspended moment where dignity remained but certainty did not. But what did that long, silent pause really reveal about Meghan, and how will the world interpret what it couldn't undo? Stay with us. Words that couldn't be taken back. When Meghan finally spoke, it wasn't the answer anyone had been bracing for. There was no tidy explanation, no sharp rebuttal, no carefully worded defense that could be lifted into headlines and debated for days. Instead, what emerged was quieter and far more unsettling in its honesty. Her voice was steady, but lower now, as if she were choosing each word not for effect, but for survival. She didn't deny the claims outright. She didn't confirm them either. She acknowledged the weight of being spoken about as though she were a strategy instead of a person, a force instead of a partner. The way she framed it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It sounded like something that had lived inside her for a long time, rarely given space to exist publicly. She spoke about limits, about what happens when every action is interpreted as control and every silence as manipulation. She admitted that living under constant judgment reshapes how you move through the world, how carefully you speak even in private, how often you question your own intentions because others insist on defining them for you. There was vulnerability in that admission, but also resolve. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was naming a truth she could no longer carry quietly. As she spoke, the audience seemed to lean forward as one. This wasn't the familiar rhythm of a televised interview. There were no applause cues, no moments of relief. The room understood, almost instinctively, that this was unscripted and irreversible. Once said, these words could not be reframed or softened by editing. They would exist exactly as they were spoken. The host listened without interruption, their earlier calm now tinged with something closer to gravity. Whatever direction the interview had been meant to take originally was gone. There was no returning to lighter topics or neatly closing the conversation. The tone had shifted too far, and everyone knew it. Meghan paused again, briefly, as if checking whether she had gone too far. Then she continued, clarifying that vulnerability does not mean surrender, and restraint does not mean guilt. She spoke about choosing when to speak and when to remain silent, not as a tactic, but as a way to protect what still felt personal in a life that rarely allowed privacy. Her words didn't resolve the questions hanging in the air. They reframed them. The realization settled slowly across the studio and through the screens watching from afar. This moment would be debated, not because of what she revealed, but because of what she refused to turn into spectacle. The interview had crossed into a space where performance no longer mattered. What remained was interpretation, and that could not be controlled. From that point on, the conversation never fully recovered its original footing. Every question that followed carried the echo of what had already been said, Every response felt secondary to the moment when Meghan chose truth over clarity, complexity over closure. The atmosphere stayed heavy, not with tension alone, but with consequence. This was no longer just an interview. It had become a turning point, one that would be replayed, dissected, and argued over long after the cameras stopped. And as the host prepared to move forward, it was clear that whatever came next would be shaped by the understanding that something essential had already been exposed and could not be undone. So did that single, unguarded moment reveal more than words ever could? And will the world ever truly see the truth? After the cameras stopped. The interview ended, but the moment didn't. As the final questions hung in the air, the cameras ceased their relentless gaze, yet the silence that followed seemed louder than any word spoken. Clips of that instant began to circulate almost immediately, spreading across social media, news platforms, and late-night commentary with a speed that felt both inevitable and unstoppable. Every frame, every pause, every subtle shift in expression was dissected, shared, and repurposed, as if the world were trying to decode something it wasn't meant to fully understand. Viewers projected their own beliefs onto the silence, each interpreting it through the lens of their loyalties, suspicions, and hopes. For some, it was confirmation. For others, a betrayal. The same moment became an argument in motion, a mirror reflecting everything from admiration to outrage. Commentators were divided, and the divisions ran deeper than they appeared. Analysts argued over tone, intent, and consequence, weighing empathy against accountability. Some insisted this was a human reaction, a person under immense scrutiny, cracking under pressure. Others insisted that public figures, aware of their visibility, must carry the weight of every word, every pause, every glance. The debate was relentless, consuming talk shows, opinion pieces, and social feeds alike. Yet amid the cacophony, a subtler truth lingered. The individual at the center of the storm was human, navigating a life lived inside a narrative controlled by forces far larger than themselves. The moment mattered not because it was unprecedented, but because it revealed the cost of living inside a story you cannot fully steer. Public figures are trained, prepared, and polished to deliver the words the world expects. But when pressure intersects with personal stakes, cracks appear. They are glimpses of vulnerability, of reality peeking through a carefully constructed image. And when the cameras stop, the weight of what has been said or unsaid does not dissipate. It lingers, following them, haunting the narrative that has already begun to form. This fracture, subtle yet undeniable, was what the public could not unsee. It sparked conversation not just about the content of the interview, but about the person who endured it. People debated motive, circumstance, and consequence, often ignoring the silent truth that behind every headline, every clip, there is a human being forced to navigate expectation and perception simultaneously. This wasn't simply a story about accountability or empathy. It was a study in pressure, perception, and the profound challenge of maintaining agency in a world determined to interpret every gesture. Even as reactions multiplied, the interview itself seemed almost secondary to its aftermath. The pause, the hesitation, the moment of visible strain, these became the points of fixation. It was as if the world was less interested in what was said than in what it thought it glimpsed. A raw, unguarded instant that could not be edited or repackaged, a crack in the armor of public persona. In the end, the moment's legacy was its ambiguity. It did not offer closure or a neatly packaged narrative. Instead, it left a fracture, subtle yet enduring, a line running through public consciousness that refused to be smoothed over. The interview had ended, but the conversation, charged with speculation, judgment, and empathy, had only just begun. This was not a conclusion. It was a hinge, an entry point into a deeper examination of human complexity under public scrutiny. The silence that followed, once fleeting, became permanent in its echo, shaping perception long after cameras were turned off. In that quiet, the truth of the experience revealed itself. The impact of living under observation, the cost of every choice magnified, and the impossibility of reclaiming a moment once it has been witnessed by the world. So what do you think really happened in that fleeting, unforgettable moment after the cameras stopped rolling? And how much of it will the public ever truly understand? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.